Many CEOs in US last year, actually, they left their job because they couldn't do it. So what are the best habits and strategies you have seen CEOs implement to stay focused, being effective while dealing with all the pressure and all this noise?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic. It's an interesting one. So I would say,
What does it take to go from founder to an unstoppable CEO? In this episode, I sit down with executive coach Katy Trost to unpack the leadership transformation most startup founders underestimate and often avoid. From letting go of control to building executive teams and managing pressure, we break down what really changes when you scale.
the typical CEO I usually work with, it's usually a CEO at a teenage stage. So you kind of have to grow up with the company, but they don't necessarily have a good framework for how to build a good company itself. When you're in the scale-up journey, I would say sometimes you have to stretch down in certain departments, and sometimes you have to give a lot of autonomy and knowing when to do what. That's super important. And then there is the executive team. I think it's a big mindset shift where the focus really becomes the executive team itself.
Is that really true that CEOs feel lonely?
Yeah, because there's just not a lot of people in your universe who have the same problems.
So how can CEOs really strike the right balance between giving their executive autonomy while still holding them accountable? So I think that is an interesting dichotomy, right?
Yeah, definitely. It all comes down to how you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leaders. So today I'm in very good company. So I'm very happy to have with us Katy Trost. And Katy is a coach and advisor to tech CEOs in London and New York City. They partner with her to become more effective leaders and build healthy organizations while navigating the responsibilities that come with serving a company and its people. Her mission is to support CEOs at Series B level and beyond on their growth journey. She worked with amazing, companies backed by leading investors such as SoftBank, Bolton, First Round Capital, Octopus Ventures, and many more. Katy is a coach and judge to Tech Nation Future 50 and Upscale, Octopus Ventures, Founders Forum, Techstars, Intel Ignite, Harvard Alumni Entrepreneurs, PwC FinTech, and the Mayor of London mentoring program, as well as an advisor board member of various startups. Katy, so excited to be with us today. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's us, you are more than one person. You are more than one person. I mean, there is way more identities in us. Katy, so look, the reason why this is going to be an exciting conversation because we operate in the same place. We both work with CEOs. You know, if there is maybe a difference, you are much more focused on Series Bs and scale companies. Sometimes most of my work is not primary work, but is on the corporate level. But I'm sure there are so many lessons for the audience based on your experience, and then I will chime in and share what happened in my work to have a meaningful conversation. And I really would like to start with, might appear like a simple question, but it's quite difficult. What does it mean to be a CEO in modern times these days? We are seeing, and I'm sure you have a perspective about a lot of clients that you have, what they're dealing with. So, in a short answer, what you really think, is the implication of being CEO today?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. It definitely made me think. And also, you can take this question in so many different directions, if that's politically or economically, or what the difference is between a big corporate CEO or a startup CEO or a scale up CEO. So I would answer the question with the typical CEO in mind who I usually work with, or who is kind of in my ecosystem at the Series B, usually in tech. And I would say it's usually a CEO at a teenage stage, right? So you kind of have to grow up with the company and have to be really in tune with the company and with the people in it. And I think it's about being tuned into where is your team at, because you will have some people from the startup journey on board, and then you have some corporate executives on board. And to bring those two worlds together is really an art. And then you as a CEO, to, let's say you go from 10 million to 100 million in revenues, you have different investors. All of a sudden, the ecosystem knows you and the business. So you do represent something. And just knowing how to show up in different rooms and how to adjust to the situation and adjust to the audience, I think that's a big skill of a CEO. And therefore, you lead differently in different circumstances, depending on which team you're with. You give different answers to, let's say, the press, right? You give different answers to different kinds of investors. So really being in tune, I would say at that stage when you're in transition is a big attribute of being a CEO. And then once you become really corporate, it just becomes a little bit more of the same, right? You just have the different components of your business grow up. And so it just kind of evens out a little bit. Versus when you're in the scale up journey, I would say sometimes you have to stretch down in certain departments and sometimes you have to give a lot of autonomy and knowing when to do what. That's super important.
Yeah, that's great. Such a great start. So, Katy, I mean, you have a lot of experience, as you were just pointing to, working with CEOs. They're becoming CEOs. So, I mean, they're starting as a founder and then they're up to the next level. So they're growing, they're scaling their company. But what, I've noticed in the past is, many founders, which by the way, I think is expected, really struggle to get that leap, the transition to becoming CEO, right? Because CEOs is a different game, as you were just saying, because context changes, right? And by the way, many founders by nature, they step into the CEO new world without formal leadership training. So essentially their leadership has been I've been on the job all the time and I learned to lead, in their own perspective, right? Now, as companies scale, the demands, on the CEO shift dramatically. So what do you think the biggest mindset first, not skills, but mindset shift that CEO must make to evolve from I was the founder, maybe the solo founder, led business to a scalable, high performing organization?
Yeah. I would say there's different components to it. One of them is definitely founder to CEO mode in terms of where you focus in the business. So 0 to 10 million, you got to get your product right. You got to get product market fit. You need to understand your customer base and you need to have a really good, repeatable sales process, right? Get all of that in place, get an initial team in place. You have your, whatever, 50, 70, 80 people, and you just get to sell in a way that's predictable and understand your customer base, right? Understand the ecosystem. So around the 100 people, I would say when you get to about 10 million in revenue, sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later, but this is just a benchmark. You want to start building a great organization and you have the people in place who are probably better at sales than you are, probably better at product than you are, probably better at HR than you are. So the focus really goes more internal in terms of how can I build a great organization and really also have a playbook for that. And there is a structure to it. Usually, I think people play it by ear. They have a structure to the product and go to market, but they don't necessarily have a good framework for how to build a good company itself, right? And then externally, right? Strategic partners, investors. So the focus goes a little bit away from the day to day and the execution and sales and product to those two aspects of business. That's the first one. I would then say at one point, you maybe around the 20, 30 million, you probably have a Series B, Series C. If you don't fundraise, if you bootstrap, probably 200 people, 180 people, something like this. And hopefully you have a board. If you don't have an investor board, you want to build some kind of advisory board, some kind of form of support and guidance where you can make more confident decisions, where you surround yourself with the right people. And that can be an independent chairman, it can be an independent non-exec, or two, it can be a board of advisors. But you just want to make sure that you have the right people around you who support you through it, because it's pretty lonely and you don't know necessarily who you can trust. So just making sure that you have those people around you is super important. And then around the same time, I would say the shift from just executing as fast as possible to bringing structure into things. I just talked to a client about this the other day, and they've been flying for 7 years, and they have never really looked at their pipeline and the conversion rates in each of the steps in the pipeline, right? And now things slow down a little bit. And now this is the perfect opportunity to just look at, okay, how can we bring more structure into this and just have the right data and even collect the data, right? So a more structured strategic planning process, for example, is one of the things where, yes, you can run at a certain speed for so long, but eventually you just need to have a little bit of a framework to things and have proper objectives that you set and so on. And then there's the executive team. I think it's a big mindset shift where you go from leading the functions and you oversee, let's say, engineering, or you have a direct report in, let's say, marketing, right? And all of a sudden you have a CRO who does that for you. So the focus really becomes the team itself and the executive team itself. And that's a people focused job, right? And an accountability job. And that's a major mindset shift because you're not in the departments anymore. You don't know what happens in the product roadmap on a weekly basis. Yes, you see it on a monthly basis, probably. Yes, you give some feedback, but you have to trust your chief product officer with that, right? So that's, I would say, something that many CEOs struggle with because they do want to be involved. And remember the article, The Founder Mode. And so many CEOs in my network were like, oh my God, I love this because I just want to be involved. I want to be in there, right? I want to know what people are up to. But your exec team really becomes the focus, and being able to manage that team like a sports team. And I know we're going to talk about this later as well. It's a major mindset shift.
Yeah, and I'll come back to this because I'm interested to have your view about creating high performing team, which is essentially what comes just after what we just discussed. I would like to go back a second to, I mean, you explain the different stages of growth and what is the implication for them and what are the shifts that needs to be happening in order to get, in a very good position, once you grow. But there is a fundamental question that, at least in my experience, needs to be addressed. For because, by the way, that is applicable to them. It's applicable to many other CEOs, even at a later stage. They're facing the challenge of delegating powerfully, meaning what is required really? That's the question. I'm curious to hear your view. What is required for a founder to get rid of so many things that were used to be under his control? Because of course they appreciate. I'm sure that by the time, although I don't think it's like, you know, push the button thing, like, okay, now I need structure, now I need more process, now I need different resources around me. But really, what is required for them to let things go and start trusting, other people, trusting a process, not anymore their personal expertise, the experience? Yes, to me, it's something that some leaders, they really struggle with. And you said before, many leaders, they're still running like an operational CEO. They want to be involved in everything. So tell me more about that.
It's an interesting question to answer because you would probably assume that I will tell you, oh yeah, just have to trust your team. You just have to have some kind of framework for it, and they're gonna come back to you. And if you do it right, they're gonna do it right. Yeah,
Yes,
you say that
it's that
always,
easy,
right? It
right?
just it just doesn't work that way. You're never gonna have an AAA team at that, right? You're just building it out. So I would say, let's say, if you're lucky, half of your leaders are really, really, really in a place of you can just trust them and let them run with it. It's kind of like when you have, when you organize a trip, for example, right? And some people you just feel like, okay, I can trust them blindly and they're gonna make sure that we're gonna be at the airport at the right time and we're gonna be, fully packed and everybody has their passports. If you don't have that feeling with somebody, it's gonna be really hard to delegate something really, really critical to them without losing sleep at night, right? So I think it's super important to first identify who are the people in your team you can blindly trust. And if that's half of them, great. Set up a process where you know, okay, I meet them on a regular basis. That can be once a week, can be twice a week, can be once every 2 weeks, depending on the function, depending on the feedback loop, etc. And you give them a really, really clear, you delegate very clearly, you give them, very clear expectations, what the outcome should look like, who should be involved, when it should be done, and so on. And then it's really about accountability, feedback, and making sure that they have the resources they need, right? I would say that's the easy part. And if you feel like you have those people on your team, you will likely find it very natural to delegate to them, right? You can go into, I call it ninja mode, where things coming your way instead of like letting them sit on your plate. And then whenever you can't do it anymore and, it becomes critical, then you delegate it. No, it comes your way and you go into ninja mode. Who can I delegate this to before it even hits
Yeah.
my plate, right? Before it even arrives here. Great if you have a good team, right? Then you have probably the other half of the team and they might have been there from day one. They might be more generalists. They might not be really experienced executives or head of departments. And so you have to hold their hand for a longer period of time. You have to stretch down. And that's what I said earlier with you need to be able to adjust to the audience, right? If you have somebody who's been It's their first time being a chief of staff. It's their first time being a VP people. It's their first time being a head of sales, right? You got to hold their hand and nurture them and really, really coach them. You go into coach mode. And you might want to set some more time aside for that. You might want to do certain tasks with them, right? So let's say, for example, the sales strategy. Let's sit down together. Let's do it together, right? And you would be surprised how many, even at the later stage, how many executives are not necessarily capable of doing that, right? So there is much more hand-holding required. I think people either go into a completely hold on to everything and I want to oversee it all, and then they're like, I can't do it anymore, and they go 180 and delegate everything. It's just falls flat. Like there's just, I don't see it to be very successful. So it's just slowly, slowly, slowly letting go and knowing when to let go and making that person also feel like they have little wins and that builds confidence in them. And so that's how you grow the leaders within the business. And you're probably going to have more success than hiring a bunch of external people who are just, very corporate, and you have only 300 people in your company and you have these two worlds clash of the original founding team and earlier people with those, more experienced executives. So it's a really fine line, I would say. And coachability of the leaders is one of the most important aspects for you to be able to even delegate. So that's my long answer.
No, I think it's great, and I think it's an interesting insight. And for many founders, probably they're not really thinking, to be, a coach without being a formal coach, but really coaching their people to be successful. That's essentially what we are saying here, and there will be more trust in people because they start seeing they're creating a powerful relation together, which I think is something that personally I see missing in many organizations, not just a startup level, even a large organization. That's why what I'm saying is the question is relevant for founders, but it actually is relevant for everybody in a top leadership seat. How can they trust people and what they need to do in order to build trust, but also to empower others, which I think is empowering is the thing is missing. So I think that is a very valid point. If we go back to the executive team, you were saying, look, at some point they need to build their inner circle, and one could be an advisory board first, but then use the formal executive team when the time comes. Look, based on what we said, before, is building a strong leadership team, meaning structure, because when you start building an executive team, you essentially start, or you already build structure, or you're building more structure because that is what required to be fully functional. However, there is a risk of losing agility, losing the entrepreneurial spirit. And it's interesting how the startup, they don't want to lose that once they grow. And also interesting from the other side of the world, when you see large corporates, they actually want to become more entrepreneurial. So they want to actually getting more agility in order to be successful because they feel like they're too fixed, rigid, bureaucrat. They become kind of what they don't really want to. So how can CEOs really strike the right balance between giving their executive autonomy while still holding them accountable? So I think that is an interesting dichotomy, right?
Yeah, definitely. It all comes down to how you spend your time, I would say. So let's say, you want to spend, I would suggest probably a day and a half you spend on your executive team. What do you want to get out of that day and a half, right? You have the accountability, or you want to coach them. You want to make sure that they get feedback and that they can evolve and can get on with their day, but also that the team really works well together. So it's a set of routines, right? You have your one-on-one meetings with your executives. I would suggest to not have more than 8 to 9 direct reports. That's why eventually the leadership team and the executive team splits out at about usually 14, 15 people. The CEO is like, oh
Yeah.
my, how am I managing this? So you want to split it out. You want to have your whatever, let's say at that point, probably 5, 6 executives. That's then going to grow, and you have a whatever chief legal officer or your chief compliance officer tagged on later on. But your essential C-levels, the CRO, the COO, CFO, chief product, and so on, that's really your team. And that team should work together as a company level team. That means they should be thinking with the exact hat on from a company level, not from a department level. So there's, the whole 5 dysfunctions of team and other methodologies that I use, which are super helpful for it. But you want to make sure that this team spends time together, that they strategize together. It's almost like a board in a way, where they have to cooperate and collaborate with each other. And it's not just, functionally that they work. So at that point, I think everybody should have a job scorecard in terms of what are their main KPIs, the OKRs for the department. They own that completely. They got to make sure that they collaborate with other departments if they need any information, resources. If they are lacking behind, they need to support each other because they really own that together. Your meeting structure should be very intentional, where you have, the time to coach, the more strategic one-on-ones with your exec team, then the ones where it's more performance accountability and delivery. You do your performance reviews, which are, again, not only functionally, but also company level questions and how they contribute to the leadership team and how they contribute to the strategy and so on and so forth. Your onboarding should be really, really in depth. I think you can get so much out of your execs if you spend a lot of time with them the first 3 months and they just have a really, really good onboarding. So your time spent with the exec team just grows more and more as the business grows. And as you delegate other things, do spend a day and a half or so with your executive team and do have regular team meetings with them, strategic team meetings, tactical team meetings, leadership team meetings, where they learn and develop as individuals, as leaders, where they learn and develop together as a team. It's just a whole set of new routines that you want to implement as a CEO once you get to, let's say, 80, 90 million in revenue. So you kind of build that out over time. So you're saying the question how to balance it?
Yeah, well, before, so there is something that sparked my interest of what you just shared. I mean, essentially, you are, and by the way, I totally agree with you. You are suggesting, recommending, and supporting CEO think about spending as much as possible time with his executive team. It could be in form of the 1 days, 1.5, then tactical, strategic, etc., one-to-one. So in other words, which by the way makes totally sense, spending time with the team. In my personal experience, I've seen it's actually kind of a mixed bag. So I've seen some CEOs totally, believe me, disregard the time with the executive team. Meaning
Yeah.
they have bilateral conversation, that's fine. They have menus, but when it comes to meeting together the team, it's more like we don't need it. Let's meet only when we have an issue, etc. Or maybe you're just 1 hour touch point, online every Monday or whatever. That to me lose totally the reason why you should have an executive team, and the executive team should be really your powerful ally to get things done. So maybe while you're answering the balance between autonomy and feel and being accountable, maybe there is something there interesting for you to consider is, okay, why many CEOs or some CEOs they really struggle to really accept the idea that the executive team needs to be nurtured, they need to be coached, they need to spend time with, because that's something that I don't know whether, by the way, resonates or not with your experience.
No, absolutely. I would say so. I think they abandon it usually because it's long term versus short term. So it's if you have to firefight, but you're then always in firefighting mode, right? You're always, it's the same with delegation or how you plan your day. You can always work on what's the most urgent or you can work on what's the most important. And if you're not proactive about the way you spend your time or the way you prioritize, then it's always going to be the most urgent because you cannot ignore the most urgent, right?
Yeah.
You have to address it. And it's very similar with the exec team. But that's why you set up certain routines where it doesn't take over your whole week, right? You have to not spend 3 days out of the week with your exec team, but just, have your one-on-ones, have your team sessions and so on. I guess in the long term, it just takes away the pressure from you as a CEO to having to make all the decisions
Yeah.
yourself. Because if
Yeah.
nobody's context or if nobody communicates with each other regularly, or oftentimes I see the exec team being hired all across, not even the country, all across the world, right? You have them spread over 5 different time zones. Like, how can you build a strong exec team that way, right? And if things go wrong, then guess what? They don't know each other well enough to actually then say, okay, we own this together. So people start blaming and finger pointing, and that's where it all falls apart. And I've seen it many times fall apart. It's not very productive. So have your exec team in one place, have them work well together, and make sure that they take some of the strategic decision making off of your plate, right? Otherwise, you just have to hold it all yourself, which you can do, but it's not really nice. Yeah, I guess you mentioned the agility. Can you expand a little bit what exactly you mean by the too much
Yeah,
or
no, I think it was just about. I think probably you already answered the question. Really,
yeah,
it's about striking balance between staying agile and keeping your entrepreneurial spirit while you are building a structure where there are more reports line, more people dealing with this, potentially breaking silos. I mean, that's, I think, is a concern that's in back of the mind for many founders or CEOs. Is okay, am I growing in a good way without losing my entrepreneurial really vein, or am I building structure that is not just increasing cost, but it's not going to make a difference for the growth of my company? I think that is a fair concern that CEOs have, right?
yeah, you also don't want to change course too often. I think
Right.
this whole like, oh, let's plan 3 to 6 months in advance and so on. Like you can do that in the beginning, but eventually you just gotta have to look at the full year. You have to forecast properly. You have to have a board to answer to. You can't just change, direction every 3 to 4 months. It just doesn't work at one point. It's not a startup anymore. And it's way too expensive. Like the headache of just turning direction so often doesn't really work. I remember somebody mentioning that they basically had a small team that was dedicated to more of the innovative projects and what did they call it? The Marines or something. And they just looked at the very long term, 10 years from now, and spend time on that. And you can afford that at one point, right? At one point, you have a handful of people who can just focus on that, but keep the rest of the team aligned on the steady course, right? The bigger the ship, you cannot just turn around the Titanic by 35 degrees, every whatever few hours. It just takes too long to shift the whole thing. Way too much effort, way too much energy to just know the size of your ship and know how much you can change without disrupting, but not at all cost.
No, it's such a fair point because there are some CEOs, out there. They have the tendency to keep changing the way out there, essentially running their own businesses
Yeah.
for a number of, in their view, valid reason. But what they essentially creates is just a level of confusion and uncertainty in people. Because when people feel like there is no one single direction and things keep changing, they totally lose engagement and focus, and you guess what results. That was brilliant. Katie, while we're going through the growth journey, we said from early days, then to better days, scaling days, executive team, process, all of that. Then it comes to the point where founders, CEOs, now they start thinking about culture. They start thinking about what is the culture that I'm building, shaping, is the same as it was in the first place? Is that what I wanted? Because there is a rule of thumb. I mean, you're talking about probably where we are right now in the conversation. We are more about the 100 plus employees, but the reality, is not reality. But there is a kind of a rule of thumb that says that after 22, 23, more or less employees, what you're gonna get in terms of culture is already something different than what was the original culture of the organization because there are more people in different countries. So expect it. So based on your experience, you know, how CEOs can prevent, preserve their core values, the behaviors they really want, while also evolving the culture that is needed to support the growth. Because you probably need a different set of culture to do something different in the future. I mean, that's my personal experience. So again, it's a kind of a striking balance between your original values and behaviors that why you started a company, provided you are still the CEO, in the organization, and then something different, new animal that is growing, is scaling. There are way more people, so you need to embrace the values that you bring from new people. At the same time, you don't want to lose, what you originally put in place. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about your experience in that.
Yeah, also an interesting one. I think it's funny because everybody spends a lot of time on articulating the values, right? And in the end, when we think of let's just say the tech ecosystem, right? And the tech companies, when you think of a culture at Google or a culture at Facebook or even the smaller tech companies, it has a very similar feel to it, right? People are wearing sneakers, they are high performing, but they are nice, teamwork is valued and so on. That's kind of what we think of when we think of a tech company, right? Then we think about Wall Street, very different kind of culture, right? It's like this Shark Tank, everybody to themselves, very individualistic. And, people might even backstab. And that's what we think of when we think of, banks and investment banks and in trading and so on, right? Then we think of manufacturing companies, and you have, again, a very, very different kind of feel to it. And everybody, even from the outside, can see the difference, right? So as a tech company, I don't think you have to overthink your values and your culture too much, right? There is a set of behaviors and guidelines that you can put up, and usually they're either performance related, they're related to teamwork. Are we more individualistic? Are we more of a team
Audience, yeah.
collaboration and teamwork focused culture or company? Do we have the customer is top of mind? That's like totally, our main focus. But in the end, the tech companies are very, very similar. So I would say, rather than overthinking the culture, it's much more helpful for employees to know, if I find myself in situation X, I should do this, no, not that, right? So if I find myself in a situation where I could work 3 more hours on this presentation or on this product or on this code to make it perfect, in the culture here, do we do that, or do we prioritize speed over perfection? And for those kind of crossroads where employees find themselves, do we put that extra work in or do we not? Right? Rather than, yeah, of course, we all want to, we all
Yeah.
want to be high performing. What does that even mean? Right? So, yeah, that's my 2 sentences to culture.
Well, I think it's a great sentence and great answer, because essentially is living values by looking at specific context during your business life where values needs to be properly embodied and then demonstrated to drive something different, which to me is a great way of thinking about culture. And also, what you're suggesting is something I do too, by the way, is for leaders to think about creating practices. So, practices where essentially what you just explained needs to happen. Like, whenever we feel X, we need to do Y. Or, so these are the specific behaviors, actions that when people stick to that, it's clear that they will produce something different and they will be embodied the values they really want to create and they want to live in organizations. So to me, that's very relevant. Let's look at a little bit more the personal journey of a CEO. Because, in my personal experience, if you look at the market right now, so we have, and I don't know whether you have seen that, but many, many CEOs, I think 40%, I don't remember the specific percentage, many CEOs in US last year, actually, they left their job. They left their job because they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it anymore in terms of mental health issues, burnout, lack of clarity, and keep changing, and more pressure from their shareholders. Sounds like, the game of a CEO right now is different than what it was before. Now, people might argue, say, well, CEOs has been always a very pressure work, and etc. But the reality is, based on data, there's many CEOs now, they are giving up. They really struggle to move forward because it's unbearable. They can't really cope anymore. And I think definitely COVID has aggravated the situation for sure.
Yeah.
But that's where people are, most of them. So, given your experience, especially for those leaders, they are scaling, meaning with the constant challenges or validating what they're doing, finances and getting more clients and justifying expense and whatever. Really, that's not just a professional challenge. That is a very deeply personal challenge for many people. And many really struggle, as I said, to deal with burnout, decision fatigue, and the pressure leading at the top. So, what are these habits, the best habits and strategies you have seen CEOs implement to stay focused, stay energized, being effective while dealing with all the pressure and all this noise that is around them?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I would say, in the world I'm in, there is definitely I build to sell, right? So I get to whatever 500, 700 million valuation, and I want to exit. So you kind of are on this marathon sprint, because it is usually 5, 7, 10 years maybe. But sometimes people think they can have some kind of balance, but realistically they probably can't, right? So almost letting go of this, okay, I'm going to find this work-life balance and it's going to be, beautiful. I'm going and leaving work at 3 p.m. on a Friday. It's probably not going to happen. So I think the one thing in the just to consider, especially if you build to sell and it's not like a long-term corporate CEO job, surrender to it to a certain degree. right? So there won't be this beautiful work-life balance. But that being said, there have to be some elements in place, right? Spend at least half a day by yourself without the kids, without your wife or your husband, and just make sure that you have time to decompress. So otherwise you become this almost like water boiler, right? And eventually you just explode, this pressure cooker. So have some time to decompress on a weekly basis, half a day. It can be Sunday afternoon, can be Sunday morning, can be Saturday morning from 5 a.m. until 9 a.m. It doesn't really matter, but have some time to decompress. At least once or twice, move your body a week, like just the very basics. And most of them, I wouldn't say they necessarily have a very, thriving social life. And again, that can be okay for a certain period of time. But just make sure that you're not completely heads down and completely isolated, even if you become friends and network with people in your industry. So it's a little bit productive at least. And you feel like, okay, this is not just, I'm just, doing something completely unrelated. But I think the isolation and feeling like you're completely alone with your issues, I think that is a big mental thing that can be really painful. So I would say have like a few elements where you have time to decompress, where you have twice a week where you just, move your body and get out of the office, and then get some people in the industry or outside the industry where you can just spend a little bit of social time with. That can already do a lot for you. And join a CEO network. I think it's super important for you to just get perspective, get insight. You don't feel like you're not alone with your issues and with your problems. And I think that can already, take off a lot of pressure on this journey. But overall, I've seen so many people try it. The work-life balance at that stage is just not really a thing. And that's kind of what people sign up for. Keep the basics in place and, know that it's not going to be
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't even believe to the work-life balance thing, because to me that doesn't exist in the real life. I mean, the real life is you working and you living while you're working, and vice versa. So the two things, the two realities are always merged in one single thing. Then it depends how you're spending time, and be clear about how you want to spend, whatever is missing for you in the day. But it's not like there is no in an equation, is no, a percentage doesn't work in that way. So I am with you. Now, last question really is, you mentioned before, we are big fans of CEO network, spending time, in mastermind or CEOs, building their inner circles. Is that really true that CEOs feel lonely?
Yeah, for sure.
So why is that, you think?
Because there's just not a lot of people in your universe who have the same problems. I mean, when you think about it, if you're not surrounded with other CEOs, there is nobody who can really relate to you. And people don't feel sorry for you because they just don't if you're the CEO. So, yeah, there's just, I would say if your spouse is not in the same ecosystem, how can they understand everything that's going
Yeah.
on? Also, they don't want to necessarily have that in their face the whole time. And then with your board, there's just a lot of things you don't want to share. Even if you trust them a lot, just don't do it. I've seen it.
And with the executive team is the same. I mean, you can't really share whatever you have in mind. So there is
yeah.
also an element of that, right?
But that I feel like is more intuitive. Like people don't really do that. Like they don't become friends with the executive team really. It's you just don't really do that. It doesn't feel right necessarily because you might have to fire them at one point and you know that, right? That's pretty much there. But with the boards, because they seem very aligned, right? Because they're, on the same page with you or whatever, until they're not. There's oftentimes it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna share, I'm
Yeah.
gonna share things that you might not want to share. But yeah, otherwise I think the CEO networks is really what's the answer. There's a bunch of good networks. I would definitely browse around if you're not in one and just make sure that you have the support.
So what's the relation between a CEO and a coach? I mean, do you see that CEOs resistant to the idea to working with a coach because they feel like they know they have all the answers? Or in your experience, I mean, we are biased, of course, you and I, for the work we do, because if we work with people as the CEOs, because they see the opportunity, see the great advantage of working with CEOs. But broadly speaking, do you see still a lot of resistance for CEOs to work with coaches?
No, actually, I feel like it's been very accepted in the tech industry. I think in
Right.
other industries, maybe not that much, but in tech, it's almost like a badge of honor. It's like you're a tennis player and you don't have a coach. Kind of weird.
Right. Interesting.
Kind of gotten to that.
Yeah, and I think that is a good final message for the people in the audience. It's not a sign of weakness. Working with a coach is not like a sign that you have things that needs to be fixed. Actually, it's a badge of honor. I think it's a perfect way to position your experience with the coach. Katy, thank you so much. That was really insightful and very practical conversation, as I expected. Where people should go if they want to know more about you and your work?
Everything is on my website, Katy, Katy Trost, Trost.com. And I also run a CEO network in London, which is called Para, but everything is basically on that page and all of the information is there.
Amazing. So, Katy, thank you so much for being on the show today. So, and good luck with your 2025.
Thanks for having us.
Exactly.